Have you ever been told you're just not enough? Not flashy enough, not loud enough, not shiny enough for the world you're in? What if someone you trusted, someone you loved, looked you straight in the eye and said, "You're too plain for this life"? That's exactly what happened to Elena Moore. Her husband, Grayson Blackwell, a man she built her world around, decided she no longer fit the image he wanted, so he replaced her. Just like that. But here's the part he never saw coming. The quiet ones, the overlooked, the underestimated, the ones who sit at the edges of the room, they're not weak. They're just watching, waiting, becoming. And when Elena walks back into Grayson's world, she doesn't come with tears or revenge in her eyes. She comes with grace, with power, with a man beside her who sees her, not as plain, but as extraordinary. This isn't just a comeback. This is a shift in power. And trust me, this time she's the one rewriting the story. The words echoed coldly in the mahogany-paneled office of the divorce attorney, colder even than the pristine glass skyline of Chicago, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Let's be honest, Elena," Grayson Blackwell said, his voice devoid of the warmth she once cherished. He adjusted the cuff of his bespoke Tom Ford suit, a nervous tic she recognized, one he always did before saying something particularly cruel. "You were perfect for the climb. The quiet, supportive, intelligent wife. But we're here now. We're at the summit, and this air." He paused, smirking. "It's too rarefied for you. You're just too plain for high society." Elena Moore, soon to be formerly Blackwell, didn't flinch. She had spent the last 6 months building a fortress around her heart, brick by painful brick. She simply stared at the man she had loved since their college days, those ramen nights and shared dreams. The man whose essays she had typed, whose early business plans she had proofread. The man whose ambition had been fed by her unwavering belief in him. He mistook her silence for weakness, for confirmation. The galas, the benefits, the weekends in the Hamptons with the Van Dorns, you shrink in those rooms, Elena. You're like a librarian at a rock concert. I need a partner who shines. Someone who knows the game. Not someone who'd rather discuss 15th century art with the catering staff. The final papers were pushed across the polished table. Her signature felt like betrayal, a betrayal of the girl she once was, the one who believed in a charming, ambitious young man. His signature, by contrast, was swift and cold. Just another deal closed. He stood up, already moving on. Beside him, his lawyer, a shark in a Brioni suit, gathered the documents. "The settlement is generous," Grayson added, "a final act of condescending charity. You'll be comfortable. You can buy all the old books you want." He left without a backward glance, leaving Elena in the echoing silence. The city lights of Chicago began to twinkle outside, each one a reminder of the world he was ascending to and the one he had left her behind in. She didn't cry. The tears had dried up weeks ago, leaving behind only a hollow ache. Too plain. The words weren't just an insult. They were a branding, an indelible mark he had seared onto her soul. The first few months of her new life were a study in gray. She moved out of their sprawling Gold Coast penthouse and into a modest but charming townhouse in Lincoln Park. She traded champagne flutes for coffee mugs and society pages for dusty art history. Elena accepted a position at the Fieldstone Library and Cultural Museum, a place of quiet reverence that suited her fractured spirit. Her life, once a whirlwind of his social obligations, became a calm routine of work, home, and long solitary walks with her beagle Baxter. Her best friend, Jasmine, a fiery investigative journalist who had never trusted Grayson, became her lifeline. "He's an insecure narcissist, Elena," Jasmine would say over wine on a Tuesday night. "He didn't want a partner. He wanted an accessory, and when the trend changed, he swapped you for the latest model." The latest model was Sienna Blake, an Instagram influencer whose main contribution to society was posing on yachts in exotic locations. Her photos were a constant presence in the digital world. Elena tried to avoid them, those splashes of garish, filtered color against the muted canvas of her own life. Sienna was everything Elena was not: loud, ostentatious, and shamelessly transactional. She was the embodiment of the world Grayson believed Elena was too plain for. One crisp autumn afternoon, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived. The return address was embossed in gold, the Blackwell Foundation. Elena's stomach twisted. It was an invitation to the Foundation's annual Starlight Gala. She, once the crown jewel of Chicago's philanthropic scene, It was at that very gala 2 years ago where Grayson had first made the cutting remark about her dress being too academic. An oversight, surely, she murmured now, her thumb tracing his flamboyant signature at the bottom of the invitation. It felt less like an invitation and more like a taunt, a reminder of the world she'd been ejected from. In the months following the divorce, Elena had thrown herself into her work, eager to reclaim her sense of purpose. But even as she applied for guest lectures, submitted proposals to historical journals, and volunteered to curate local exhibits, she found herself met with polite, empty nods. One conference organizer told her, with a tight smile, that they'd prefer someone more dynamic. Another declined her application altogether, then published a feature on Grayson's new fiancé's take on art and society. It was as though her credentials had evaporated the moment she'd stopped being Mrs. Blackwell. Each rejection chipped away at her confidence, until even walking into an academic space felt like stepping into enemy territory. She was about to toss it into the recycling bin when her phone buzzed. It was Jasmine. "You got it, didn't you? The invitation to that jerk-off jamboree? It's already on its way to the trash," Elena said flatly. No, you don't." Jasmine's voice was sharp, firm. "You are not going to let him erase you. You are not going to let him think for 1 second that his ridiculous, cruel little verdict on your life was the final word. You have to go." "Why?" Elena countered. "So he can pity me? So his new girlfriend can look me up and down and smirk? No, thank you. I'd rather spend the evening alphabetizing my spice rack." "You're not going to go as Elena Blackwell, the sad ex-wife," Jasmine said, her tone softening. "You're going as Elena Moore, the brilliant, beautiful, independent woman who is so much better off without him. You just don't see it yet. This isn't for him, Elena, it's for you." Elena glanced around her quiet apartment, the stacked books, the worn armchair. It was safe here, but also a cage built from her own fear and his lingering words. Too plain. The phrase coiled in her gut. Maybe Jasmine was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. But how could she possibly walk into that lion's den alone? The thought was paralyzing. She hung up, the heavy invitation sitting on her counter like a dare. A week later, an unexpected opportunity arrived, a lifeline thrown from another world. Dr. Whitmore, the head curator at the Fieldstone Museum, called Elena into his office. His eyes, magnified behind thick lenses, held an unusual spark of excitement. "Elena," he began, "an extraordinary proposition has landed on my desk." She leaned forward, intrigued. "It's unconventional. A private collector, one of the most reclusive and significant figures in the world, requires an art historian for a short-term, intensive project." Elena's brows lifted. "He's recently acquired several long-lost Renaissance sketches, believed to originate from the studio of Verrio. He needs them authenticated, cataloged, and curated for a private showing. The work requires absolute discretion, a non-disclosure agreement thicker than a phone book. But the access, my dear, it's the kind of project we dream of." "Who's the collector?" Elena asked. Dr. Whitmore shook his head. "His name isn't for public circulation. But I'll tell you this, he's known not only for his collection, but also for his quiet generosity. In certain circles, they call him the ghost philanthropist. He insists on complete anonymity until the consultant is chosen and the NDA is signed," Dr. Whitmore said. "All communication goes through his family office. What I can tell you is this, he's based here in New York and the compensation is astronomical. He specifically requested someone with your expertise in 15th century Florentine art." The project felt like a godsend. It was a chance for Elena to fully immerse herself in the very passion Grayson had once belittled, a way to reclaim her worth on her own terms. It was a world away from galas and gossip columns. She accepted immediately. That following Monday, a sleek black car, so polished it seemed to absorb the light around it, picked her up. But it didn't take her to a gallery or a museum. Instead, it pulled up to an impossibly modern skyscraper in the financial district. The building had no name, only a discreet silver logo, a stylized S. In the silent marble lobby, she signed an NDA so formidable it made her head spin with the threat of legal consequences. Then she was led to a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse, less an apartment and more a private museum. The walls were lined not with garish modern art, but with pieces that took her breath away. A brooding Rothko, a delicate Monet, a powerful Dürer. And in the center of the main room, housed in climate-controlled display cases, were the sketches. Despite the awe, Elena's first few days were quietly turbulent. The silence, though luxurious, felt at times like an echo chamber amplifying her own doubts. She double-checked every note she made, terrified of misattributing a stroke, second-guessing the clarity of her own expertise. Alone among such masterpieces, she sometimes questioned whether she belonged there at all. One evening, she stayed past 10, not out of necessity, but because she couldn't bring herself to leave while still unsure about a specific signature's provenance. She wasn't just proving herself to the mysterious collector, she was proving herself to the voice inside her that still echoed Grayson's disdain. For 2 weeks, Elena lived in scholarly bliss. She was given a lab coat, a digital microscope, and unrestricted access to the collection. She arrived at 8 a.m. and often didn't leave until after 9 p.m., completely lost in the faint charcoal lines, the ghost of a master's fingerprint, the very texture of history. She communicated with the mysterious collector solely through encrypted emails, sending daily reports with detailed notes and findings. His replies were always brief, but thoughtful, raising questions that revealed a deep, sincere understanding of the art itself. He wasn't just a collector of rare things, he was someone who valued meaning over ownership. She sensed humility behind his curiosity, a quiet respect for history and for her work. In this silent sanctuary of art, Elena felt her confidence return. She wasn't plain, she was an expert. She was valued for her intellect, her insight, and her eye. The sting of Grayson's words began to fade, slowly replaced by the thrill of rediscovery. On the final day of the project, after submitting her comprehensive report, confirming the authenticity of 4 out of 7 sketches, she delivered a stunning conclusion. One of them was a previously undocumented work by a young Leonardo da Vinci. She received a different kind of email. "Ms. Moore, your work has been exemplary, beyond my expectations. I find I am not yet ready to conclude our conversation. Would you join me for dinner this evening to discuss your findings in person? A car will be waiting at 7 p.m. Her heart pounded. Julian Hart. The name hit her like a physical blow. Julian Hart wasn't just a billionaire, he was the billionaire, a tech visionary who had launched a groundbreaking AI company in his 20s, then quietly built an empire spanning sustainable energy, biotech, and apparently priceless art. He was notoriously private, a ghost in the machinery of global finance. Rarely photographed, public appearances so few, they were practically lore. He was a myth, a legend, and Elena had been working for him for 2 weeks. That evening, the same sleek black car pulled up once more, this time taking her to a discreet, unmarked restaurant in Tribeca, a place she knew to be among the most exclusive in the world. She was guided past the main dining room and out onto a private terrace overlooking a quiet, meticulously lit garden. A man stood with his back to her, watching the city lights. He turned as she approached, and he was not what she expected. He wasn't the slick, predatory type like Grayson, nor the eccentric genius tabloids often speculated about. Julian Hart looked to be in his early 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, a calm stillness in his demeanor, and an unshakable sense of thoughtful gravity. He wore a simple dark cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, an understated elegance that made Grayson's designer suits seem gaudy in comparison. "Ms. Moore," he said, his voice calm and low. "Julian Hart, it's a pleasure to finally meet the mind behind the brilliant emails." He pulled out her chair. As she sat, Elena felt an unexpected calm settle over her. There was no performance in his manner, no ego. "Mr. Hart? Please," he interrupted gently, "call me Julian, and the collection is only worthwhile if it can be understood. You've brought it to life." They spoke for hours. They talked of Verrio's workshop, Leonardo's genius, the political complexities of the Medici court. He matched her knowledge with his own, not competitively, but with the warm enthusiasm of a genuine admirer. He listened with a presence that made her feel like the most fascinating person in the room. Their conversation eventually drifted to other topics. Her work at the museum, her academic background, her life before all this. She found herself opening up, hesitant at first, then with growing ease. He didn't pry, but there was something about his stillness, the way he paid attention, that made honesty feel safe. At one point, he mentioned a recent initiative funding arts education in underserved communities, describing it not as charity, but as restoration. Creativity, he said, should never be a privilege. It was during a quiet pause in the conversation that he looked at her, his expression thoughtful, expression unreadable. Julian set his glass down. "I know who your ex-husband is, Elena." She stiffened. "Oh, Grayson Blackwell," she said softly. Julian repeated the name like it left a bitter taste in his mouth. His company, Blackwell Holdings, has been making a very aggressive, very hostile play for a green energy startup I've been quietly funding for the past 5 years. A company called Luminara Tech. Elena's mind reeled. Two worlds she had kept firmly separate had just collided. "He's a brute in business, just as I imagine he is in his personal life," Julian continued, his voice still calm, but now laced with a quiet steel. "He uses leverage, intimidation, and PR spin to crush smaller competitors. This deal, he thinks it's his golden ticket, his pivot from real estate shark to tech visionary." Julian paused, taking a sip of water. "I read the gossip columns, Elena, not because I enjoy them, but because it's wise to know what piranhas like Blackwell are circling. I read about your divorce. I read what he said about you." Heat bloomed across Elena's cheeks, shame and fury in equal measure. So he knew she had been branded too plain. Julian's eyes held hers. "What he said, it's a reflection of his own vulgarity, not of you. Substance threatens him. Nuance frightens him. He doesn't want a partner, he wants a mirror." He leaned forward slightly. "The Blackwell Foundation Gala, it's in 2 weeks. That's when he plans to unofficially announce his so-called triumph over Luminara Tech to his investors. He thinks he already owns the room." Then came the proposal, delivered with the calm precision of a strategist. "I believe we are in a position to help each other," Julian said. "I would be honored if you'd attend the gala with me, as my guest." Elena stared at him, the clink of silverware and low murmur of the restaurant fading into a distant hum. "As your guest?" she repeated, voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" "For several reasons," Julian said, laying them out with clear, quiet intent. "First, Grayson Blackwell's hubris is his greatest weakness. He needs to believe he's the smartest, most powerful man in any room. Your presence on the arm of someone he views as a rival, a more significant one than he'd ever admit, will shake him. It will distract him. And on a night when he needs to be perfectly composed. A distraction could be fatal," she finished, breath catching. Julian nodded once. "Precisely." "I have a counter-move planned for that evening," Julian said. "A very significant one. Your being there adds a psychological layer to my strategy. It would be checkmate on 2 fronts, business and let's call it social justice." Elena's mind was spinning. It was a calculated move. Cold, tactical. She was a pawn, a beautiful, unexpected piece to move across the board. The old Elena, the one who had spent a decade shrinking herself to fit Grayson's world, would have recoiled at the idea. She would have been insulted. But she wasn't that Elena anymore. The past few weeks of quiet, focused work had rekindled something inside her, a fire she thought had long gone cold. "And the second reason?" she asked, her voice steadier. Julian's expression softened. The strategist receded. The man remained. "The second reason is more personal." He paused before continuing, voice low and sincere. "I've spent the last 2 weeks in conversation with a brilliant, passionate, and deeply insightful woman. I've seen how your eyes light up when you speak about what you love. The idea that a man like Grayson Blackwell could look at that and call it plain, it offends me. And frankly, it offends the entire concept of substance. Letting him believe that his verdict stands, that's unacceptable." He let the words settle. "This isn't about revenge, Elena, not the petty kind. This is about reclamation. You wouldn't be my pawn. You would be my partner for the evening. We'd walk in there as equals, each with something to gain, each with a deep and justified disrespect for our host." Elena looked at him. Really looked. There was no pity in his eyes, only respect. And something else. A quiet, shared disdain for the hollow spectacle that Grayson so desperately clung to. Julian wasn't offering to save her. He was offering her a weapon and inviting her to join the fight. "He'll be with Sienna Blake," Elena said, testing the idea aloud. "She's very shiny." A flicker of a smile played at Julian's lips. "My dear Miss Moore, a spotlight is only bright in a dark room. You're not a spotlight. You're the sunrise, much quieter, but infinitely more powerful. He's chosen spectacle, Julian said, his voice calm. We'll counter with gravitas. A strange, exhilarating sensation coursed through her. It was a cocktail of fear and empowerment. Jasmine's words echoed in Elena's mind. This isn't for him. It's for you. Walking into that gala on the arm of Julian Hart wasn't just about proving Grayson wrong. It was about proving to herself that he no longer held any power over her. His definition of who she was meant nothing. What would this partnership entail, she asked. It would entail a few planning sessions. Julian said simply, and a new dress. Something that makes you feel like the woman I've been speaking with all night, not the woman Grayson Blackwell tried to leave behind. She thought of the cream-colored invitation still sitting on her counter. It had once felt like a summons to humiliation. Now it felt like a challenge. And for the first time in a very long time, Elena Moore wanted to rise to meet it. Okay, she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. I'll do it. Julian inclined his head, a warm, genuine smile finally breaking through his usual reserve. Excellent. I believe it's going to be a most memorable evening. Their alliance was forged over the next 2 weeks. Elena's life transformed again, but this time it wasn't a retreat into solitude. It was a carefully guided blossoming. Julian was true to his word. There were planning sessions, but they felt less like meetings and more like long conversations between equals. They'd meet at his penthouse, ostensibly to discuss strategy, but the conversations would drift into art, literature, technology, and the future. She learned about his deep passion for green energy, and his belief that technology must be guided by ethics and empathy, that innovation meant nothing without integrity. He, in turn, listened intently as she mapped out the subtle, coded behaviors of the elite circles she once moved through, offering him a guide through a world he disdained, but now had to navigate. He also learned about the wounds Grayson had left behind. One evening, as they reviewed the guest list, Elena faltered. Her voice caught as she recalled the casual cruelty of Grayson's circle of friends. They have a way of looking right through you, she said, staring into her cup of tea. If you're not in the right designer, if you haven't just returned from somewhere exclusive, you're invisible. You're just furniture. Grayson used to get so angry at me for not playing the game. The game is for children, Julian said softly. We're not there to play. We're there to change the board. He was meticulous about the transformation. But it wasn't cosmetic. He didn't just send a stylist to Elena's door. Instead, he introduced her to a woman named Genevieve, a legendary couturier in her late 60s, known for her sharp wit and complete disdain for fleeting trends. Her atelier was a quiet, sunlit space on the Upper East Side, a world apart from the flashy Fifth Avenue showrooms. So, Genevieve said, circling Elena with a discerning eye. Julian tells me we are dressing for a resurrection. Elena blushed. Something like that. Forget everything your ex-husband ever taught you, Genevieve commanded, already sorting through bolts of fabric. He deals in labels. We deal in art. His women are billboards. You will be a sculpture. There were no trendy skin-bearing dresses. Instead, Genevieve presented silks that drank in the light, deep sapphire, smoky charcoal, and pearlescent charmeuse that caught in the folds like whispered moonlight. She didn't ask Elena what she wanted to look like. She asked how she wanted to feel. Powerful, Elena said, surprising herself. And calm. Completely, unshakably calm. The dress they created together was a masterpiece of quiet confidence. Midnight blue silk, nearly black in the shadows, flowed in a column from a single sculpted shoulder strap. It didn't scream for attention. It commanded it, through cut, fabric, and the silent grace it gave to her posture. During this time, her bond with Julian deepened. The line between their strategic alliance and personal connection blurred into something intangible, but real. He called her one night, not to plan, but just to ask her opinion on a young artist he was considering collecting. She found herself texting him a passage from a novel that made her laugh. They were building something, not centered on Grayson, not even on the gala. Just something real. The day before the event, a velvet box arrived at her apartment. Inside was a pair of diamond earrings, not large or showy, but elegant. Art Deco Cartier pieces from the 1920s, each a subtle cascade of light. The note inside read, "For the sunrise." That night, Jasmine came over. Her eyes widened as she saw the dress hanging on the door. "Oh my God, Elena," Jasmine breathed. "That's not a dress, that's armor." Elena smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I know." "Are you nervous?" Jasmine asked, pouring them each a glass of wine. "Terrified," Elena admitted. "But it's a different kind of fear than before. Not fear of being judged." She paused, searching for the words. "It's fear of my own power. I think it feels unfamiliar." "Get used to it," Jasmine said, raising her glass. "Here's to Elena Moore, the woman who was never plain, not for 1 second. They just weren't smart enough to see the picture." Elena reached out and gently touched the cool midnight silk of the gown. She was ready. The board was set. The pieces in motion. Tomorrow night, she wasn't just walking into a gala, she was walking back into her own life. The night of the Starlight Gala arrived with the hum of anticipation that only a New York City evening could conjure. The event was held at the Museum of Modern Art. Its soaring glass atrium had been transformed into a dream of white orchids, crystal chandeliers, and soft golden light. A river of sleek black cars glided toward the entrance, delivering the city's elite onto the red carpet, flanked by a ravenous wall of photographers. As their car approached, Elena felt the flicker of an old anxiety return. The flashes, the noise, the energy of a crowd ready to devour something beautiful. She turned to Julian. He was dressed in a classic single-breasted tuxedo, effortless in his presence. With his reserved charisma and quiet confidence, he looked less like a tech mogul and more like a figure from a forgotten era, timeless and untouchable. He met her gaze, offering a small, reassuring nod. "Ready?" he asked, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "As I'll ever be," she said, breathing deeply. The car door opened, and the energy shifted. The photographers, used to politicians, celebrities, and high-profile investors, froze for a beat. Julian Hart's public appearances were mythic. Some had speculated he didn't even exist outside of boardrooms and encrypted emails. But here he was. And on his arm? Not a starlet, not a socialite. A collective gasp rippled through the press line. They didn't recognize a model or a socialite. They recognized a mystery. And in her midnight blue gown, with the subtle fire of the vintage Cartier diamonds at her ears, Elena was utterly captivating. She didn't pose. She didn't preen. She simply stood, poised, serene, untouched, her hand resting lightly on Julian's arm. They walked the red carpet at a measured, deliberate pace. In contrast to the other couples, grinning, posturing for the flashing cameras, Julian and Elena moved like they owned the silence between the flashbulbs. Their calm, shared gravity created an invisible shield around them. Inside the soaring atrium of the Museum of Modern Art, the scene glittered with champagne, air kisses, and sharpened vanity. And as they entered, the shift was immediate. Whispers, stares, conversations stalling mid-sentence. Elena caught sight of familiar faces, people who had dismissed her, ignored her at countless social events, now watching her with open curiosity and confusion. Then she saw him. Grayson Blackwell, stationed near the grand staircase, a glass of champagne in hand. Sienna Blake clung to his arm, dressed in a sequin-drenched crimson gown that sparkled with blinding desperation. Her laughter rang loud, calculated, theatrical. Grayson saw them first. The smile on his face froze. The glass halted midair. His eyes widened, first with disbelief, then with a dark, furious undertone. He looked from Julian Hart, the one man in New York he both feared and envied, to the woman standing beside him, Elena Moore, his plain, boring, bookish ex-wife. Looking like that. Sienna followed his gaze. Her painted smile flickered as she took in the scene. She sized up Elena with a trained, competitive eye. But this time, there was no opening. No flaw. No weakness. Elena wasn't trying to compete. She existed on an entirely different plane. The quiet elegance of her presence made Sienna's sequins look garish, desperate. Elena felt Grayson stare like a heat wave. But it didn't make her shrink. She met his gaze across the room, holding it steadily. She didn't smirk. She didn't smile. She simply looked at him, with calm, dignified indifference. And then, she turned her attention back to Julian. As if Grayson Blackwell were no more than an outdated painting, framed but no longer relevant. It was more devastating than any insult she could have spoken. Julian leaned closer, his voice a low murmur in her ear. "The piranha seems to have lost his appetite." A genuine smile touched Elena's lips. Checkmate. They moved through the room. Julian greeted only a few people, with quiet, thoughtful courtesy. And when he introduced Elena, it wasn't as a date. It was, "This is my associate, Miss Elena Moore." To a prominent senator, he added, Elena is one of the foremost experts on Renaissance art. To a tech CEO, she brings a fascinating perspective on the relationship between classical aesthetics and modern design. He wasn't parading her. He was presenting her. He was building her a platform, right in the middle of the very world that once cast her out. Eventually, as if pulled in by some toxic gravitational force, Grayson Blackwell approached. Sienna Blake trailed a step behind, her usual poise replaced by something strained. Sterling, Grayson said, forcing a jovial tone that didn't reach his eyes. Didn't expect to see you here. I didn't think this was your scene. I make exceptions for rare occasions. Julian replied smoothly, his gaze remained level, cool, controlled. Grayson's eyes flicked to Elena, a muscle twitched in his jaw. Elena, he said, you look different. The words dangled, meant to be a compliment but shaped like a slight, a reminder of how he thought she used to look. Less. Before Elena could respond, Julian stepped in. She looks exactly as she is, he said evenly. Perhaps your vision has improved. The barb landed, clean, lethal. Elena finally spoke, her voice calm, poised. Hello, Grayson, Sienna. She offered a polite nod, clinical in its distance. There was no tremor in her tone, no hesitation, no pain, just cool, detached civility. And that unnerved Grayson more than anything else could have. Floundering, he attempted to reassert himself, his shoulders puffed up. So what's a reclusive genius like you doing with my ex-wife? He asked, the word my sharp and territorial. Did she read you a bedtime story from one of her dusty old books? The insult was childish, desperate, pathetic. It was the flailing of a man who had lost control. Elena didn't even blink. Some people find intelligence compelling, Grayson, she said simply. It's a matter of taste, I suppose. Just then, the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, he called. It is my honor to welcome the founder of the Blackwell Foundation and our host for the evening, Mr. Grayson Blackwell, for a special announcement. Grayson cast a triumphant, venomous glance toward Julian. This was it, his moment, his victory lap. He straightened his tie and strode toward the stage, leaving Sienna standing awkwardly in his wake. Julian gently squeezed Elena's hand. Showtime, he whispered. Grayson stood at the podium, basking in the spotlight. He surveyed the room, the titans of New York finance, politics, and culture, his investors, his rivals, all gathered in a room built to celebrate him. His confidence surged. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began, his voice smooth and practiced. We're here to support a great cause, but also to celebrate the future. A future of innovation, bold moves, and progress. He paused, milking the silence. As many of you know, Blackwell Holdings is about more than buildings. It's about building the future. And tonight, I'm proud to announce that we are in the final stages of acquiring one of the most forward-thinking companies in sustainable energy, Luminara Tech. Polite applause swept the room. In the corner, Elena caught sight of investors nodding smugly, confident in their seats at the table of Grayson's empire. Grayson's eyes found Julian, smug, gloating. It's a new era for Blackwell Holdings, he declared. He was just beginning his next boast when a calm, authoritative voice cut clean through the room. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Mr. Blackwell. Heads turned. Julian Hart hadn't moved an inch, but his voice, quiet, crisp, and amplified by the acoustics, landed with seismic force. He held up his phone, the screen glowing. My apologies for the interruption, Julian said, his tone deceptively gentle. But in our industry, news travels quickly. You may want to check your stock alerts. A wave of confusion swept through the atrium. Grayson froze. Guests, investors included, began pulling out their phones. Gasps, whispers, muttered curses. There, displayed on Julian's screen, and now dozens more, was a breaking headline from the Wall Street Journal, posted just moments earlier. Sterling Corp acquires majority stake in Luminara Tech. Announces massive Green Guardian partnership with Luminara Tech. Sterling Corp acquires majority stake, effectively blocking Blackwell Holdings' hostile takeover. The headline flashed across dozens of phones at once. The room erupted in a chaotic chorus of whispers and gasps. You could hear the sound of a multi-billion-dollar deal crashing into dust. Grayson stood frozen on stage, his eyes locked on Julian. What? He croaked. What is this? This is impossible. Julian's voice remained steady, measured and calm as ever. It's quite possible, he said. While you were planning this gala, we were finalizing a partnership. Luminara's board accepted our offer an hour ago. He paused, then added coolly, an offer that doesn't involve gutting their company for parts. We intend to invest in their vision, not dismantle it. The room fell still. Julian then glanced toward the event coordinator, who was now receiving frantic messages in his earpiece. In fact, Julian continued, as the new majority partner in Luminara Tech, Sterling Corp is pledging to match every dollar raised here tonight and redirect the total funds to STEM education programs for underprivileged girls. A hush fell over the atrium. He had just hijacked Grayson's entire evening, flipping it from a monument to ego into a statement of substance. He didn't just win, he transformed the event. But Julian wasn't done. He turned his gaze to Elena, his expression warm and unmistakably proud. This strategic pivot, he said, his voice now personal, reverent, wasn't born in a boardroom. It was inspired by a series of conversations about legacy, about purpose, about the difference between building something that lasts and something that merely shines. His voice softened. It was thanks to the insight of a brilliant advisor who reminded me that the most valuable assets are often the ones quiet people overlook. Then, in front of everyone, he raised his glass. To Miss Elena Moore. Every head in the room turned. She was no longer just a mysterious beauty on a billionaire's arm. She was the mind behind the moment, the quiet strategist who had engineered Grayson Blackwell's unraveling without raising her voice. Grayson stood there, alone under the hot lights, his face a study in rage, disbelief, and the flicker of something far more dangerous. Recognition. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had never understood the nature of power at all. He had chased the glitter. She had aligned herself with the gold. Elena finally allowed herself a quiet, serene smile. She looked directly at her ex-husband, the man who had tried to diminish her, and delivered the coup de grace. Her voice was soft, heard only by those standing near, but her words were a scalpel. You were right about one thing, Grayson, she said, her tone as smooth and composed as the midnight silk of her gown. I was too plain for your world. She paused, her gaze unwavering. I've come to realize I prefer a world built on substance, not spectacle. And with that, she turned. She took Julian's offered arm. Together, they walked out of the gala, their departure a final, elegant blow to Grayson's shattered kingdom. They didn't look back. The fallout from the Starlight Gala wasn't a slow unraveling. It was an inferno. For Grayson Blackwell, the morning after was the beginning of a nightmare, one entirely of his own making. He awoke in his cavernous Park Avenue penthouse, the once luxurious silk sheets feeling like coarse burlap against his skin. His head pounded from a sleepless night fueled by fury and disbelief. The silence of the apartment was complete. Sienna was gone. No note, no dramatic farewell, just gone. Her walk-in closets, empty. Her absence, as total and calculated as a deleted headline. Grayson stumbled into his media room, surrounded by screens that once displayed his empire, his accolades, his dominance. Now they projected his downfall. On Bloomberg, analysts picked apart his botched Luminara takeover like vultures dissecting a carcass. On CNBC, a graph beside his face showing Blackwell Holdings pre-market stock, a vertical red line plunging into oblivion. His ticker symbol, BLK, glowed like a scarlet letter. But it was the headline that cut deepest. Sterling's Gambit, how a tech titan and a mysterious strategist toppled a real estate king. He began making calls. His CFO, once full of sycophantic praise, sent him to voicemail. He tried Richard Davenport, chairman of the board, a man Grayson had golfed with for years. Richard answered, but his voice was ice. Grayson, he said flatly, no greeting, no warmth. There's nothing to discuss. We're convening an emergency meeting at noon. Click. Your presence is requested, the email read, but the outcome is predetermined. We advise you to have legal counsel present. Grayson stared at the message, the words blurring. Richard, it's a setback. We can fight this, he pleaded into the phone, his voice cracking with a desperation he despised. There is no we, Grayson, Richard replied, his tone like chipped ice. You flew too close to the sun and you didn't just burn your own wings. You nearly torched the company. He paused. Julian Hart doesn't lose. You should have known that. You let your ego cloud your fiduciary duty. The board is unanimous. Click. The line went dead. Grayson hurled the phone against the wall. It shattered against a framed photo of him ringing the NASDAQ opening bell. He stood in silence, alone. The loyalty he once commanded, gone. The fear he had instilled, irrelevant. The friendships he had curated, all transactional. And as his value plummeted, those accounts closed, fast. Later that day, the final humiliation didn't come from the boardroom. It came from a push notification. A gossip blog, splashed with a paparazzi photo of Sienna Blake breezing through LAX. Her hand rested on the arm of a silver-haired German industrialist. The headline, "Trade Up, Sienna Blake ditches sinking Blackwell for a certified billionaire." He had built a world of spectacle, and now he was the tragic star of its most pathetic finale. For Elena, the morning couldn't have felt more different. She woke in her cozy Brooklyn brownstone, the soft weight of her Beagle Buster curled against her feet. Her phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand, text after text from Chloe, each one a screenshot. Forbes, meet Elena Moore, the sterling strategist who checkmated Grayson Blackwell. Vanity Fair, the plain wife's revenge, how a quiet art historian became NYC's most intriguing woman. The New York Times, more than a deal. Hart and Moore turned philanthropy into a power play. She stared at them, blinking. The words didn't feel real. The sterling strategist? She hadn't set out for this. She had simply spoken the truth to a man who had taken the time to listen. She hadn't sought revenge, only reclamation. And yet, somehow, the world had recast her as the heroine in a high-stakes epic. Later, she took Buster for their usual walk in the park. Jeans, a sweater, a baseball cap. She hoped for anonymity. It was futile. A photographer, clearly tipped off, sprang from behind the trees. The flash flared. But the panic she once would have felt? Gone. She simply lifted her hand, shielded her eyes, pulled Buster closer, and kept walking. Head high, pace steady. The old Elena would have panicked. She would have felt exposed, judged. But the new Elena? She felt a strange detachment, as if the world's noise, the headlines, the speculation, were happening to someone else. They were writing a narrative about her. But the truth? The truth was quieter, and it lived inside her now. The real story, the one that mattered, had already begun. Not at the gala, but in the velvet-lined quiet of Julian's car as they pulled away from the glittering spectacle. The adrenaline had faded, and in its place was something deeper. A calm, steady stillness, shared between two people who had just dismantled an empire without ever raising their voices. Outside, the city shimmered. "Are you all right?" Julian asked gently, his voice low, his hand finding hers on the seat between them. The touch wasn't possessive, it was grounding. "I am," Elena replied. She turned to look at him, and even her own voice surprised her, with its clarity, its peace. "For the first time in a very long time, I feel completely and utterly myself. I feel free. Not just free of Grayson, but free of the woman she had tried to become for him." Julian nodded slowly. "So, the arrangement is concluded," he said. His tone was measured, but there was something behind it, something uncertain. "Our work is done." A pang of panic rose in her chest. What if he thought this was goodbye? "The arrangement is," she agreed, her fingers tightening around his. "But I hope our friendship isn't." He turned to face her fully. The car's hum fell away. "Elena," he began, his voice stripped of its usual calm reserve. "What I said in there tonight, about your insight, about how you've shifted my perspective, none of that was for show. It wasn't for them. It was the truth. The raw truth. Our conversations these past few weeks, they've been more challenging, more engaging than any deal I've ever negotiated. You don't just see the world, you understand it." He hesitated. "And the thought of that, of you not being in my life, that's unacceptable to me." "It doesn't have to end," she whispered. "The business deal may be why we met, Julian, but it's not why I want to stay." In that moment, the entire pretense of strategy and arrangement melted away. What remained was something real. Not victory, not vengeance, but connection, genuine and hard-earned. It wasn't a rescue, and it never had been. He had simply seen her, and in doing so, he helped her see herself again. Weeks turned into months, 2, then 3. Their lives began to intertwine, not through dramatic declarations, but through quiet, steady connection. Sunday gallery visits. Long dinners filled with debates on everything from AI ethics to the fall of the Roman Empire. Evening walks in Central Park. Two people, completely at ease in each other's orbit. The idea for the foundation began one such evening. They were in Julian's sprawling library, a space that felt more like a retreat than a showpiece. Elena was speaking with passion about a set of damaged frescoes in a small museum in Florence, pieces at risk of disappearing forever, due to lack of funding. It's a tragedy, she said, eyes shining. An entire chapter of beauty, of history, vanishing over a few $100,000. Do you know the stories they could tell? Julian wasn't just listening. He was watching, absorbing, the way her entire being lit up with purpose. He saw it clearly. This was her canvas. Your vision needs a bigger space, Elena, he said quietly. The Morgan is an incredible institution, but what you feel, what you want to do, it's bigger than one building. She blinked. What are you saying? I'm saying, let's build it. His voice was calm, but beneath it was that same quiet force that had shaken a billion-dollar empire. Let's create something that finds those forgotten pieces, that funds restoration, that lifts up overlooked voices. A foundation, not mine, not Sterling Corp's. Ours, your vision, my capital, a true partnership. And so the Hartmore Arts Foundation was born. Elena left the museum, not in sadness, but with a purpose she had never known. She poured her soul into the mission, crafting a charter that reflected her core values, to champion substance over spectacle, to elevate what others overlook, and to celebrate the kind of art that reveals the true human spirit. 6 months after the gala, they stood in a buzzing gallery in Chelsea. It was the Foundation's inaugural event, featuring a raw, brilliant young sculptor from the Bronx Elena had discovered. The room wasn't filled with high society. It was filled with artists, students, critics, people who felt something when they saw truth carved into stone. Elena moved through them in a deep green dress, elegant but unassuming. She wasn't playing hostess, she was leading. She introduced the artist to potential patrons. She explained techniques to curious visitors. She linked a student with a mentor, a dreamer with a believer. Her face glowed with quiet joy. From across the gallery, Julian watched her. The way she moved through the space, the way people leaned in when she spoke, the light in her eyes. A profound sense of pride. And something deeper, something unspoken, settled over him. This was the woman who had captivated him with nothing but her mind, long before he had ever seen her face. And now, this was her world. She was home. Eventually, Elena made her way back to his side, her fingers finding his with the same natural ease she now carried in every step. "It's a good night," she said softly, a contented smile playing on her lips. Julian looked at her and smiled. "It's a masterpiece," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her gaze drifting over the crowd, the art, the conversations, the energy. "He once told me," she murmured, the words almost an afterthought, "that I was a black and white photograph." The old memory of Grayson's words was distant now, like a quote from a book she'd long since closed. Dull, lacking color, Julian turned to her. His hands came up to gently cup her face, his eyes, normally so intense, so observant, soft with something deeper. He was wrong, he said quietly. The words meant only for her. He was wrong about everything, but especially about that. "You were never the photograph, Elena. A photograph is frozen, still. But you? You've always been the artist. You see the blank canvas, you mix the colors, you create." He gestured to the room around them, to the foundation, to the people, to the energy that pulsed through it all. "And this is just the beginning." Elena looked up at him and then around her, at the life she had built, at the beauty that came not from spectacle, but from truth. And in that moment she knew, without question, that she wasn't just living in a masterpiece. She was creating it. Each day, another brushstroke. And that's the story of how Elena Moore went from being labeled too plain to becoming the woman who dismantled an arrogant empire and built something infinitely more powerful in its place. Because real worth? It isn't determined by anyone's inability to see it. Real power doesn't perform. It doesn't shout. It builds, quietly, unshakably. Elena didn't get revenge. She got something far better. She reclaimed her story. She defined herself, and in doing so she created a life so full of grace and purpose, her ex-husband wouldn't have even recognized it, much less deserved to be part of it. Certainly, let's take a step back and reflect. So that's the end of the story. But maybe, dear friend, you're still here with me, still listening, still feeling something stir. If you are, then maybe the story touched something deep inside you, in a way words rarely do. Let's talk, just you and me. What Elena's journey reminds us is this: we are not who others say we are. We are who we choose to become, every single day. When someone tries to reduce you, says you're too plain, too soft, or not enough, You don't need to fight them with volume. You fight them with grace, with truth, with purpose. This story isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it, that matters." And Elena, she didn't scream. She didn't break. She chose to rebuild, chose silence over spectacle, chose meaning over ego. And that choice, that's real power. Maybe you've been where she was. Maybe you've been dismissed, undervalued, made to feel small. But let this story be your reminder. Your worth is not dependent on recognition. It's already inside you. The quiet, dignified strength to create your own masterpiece, stroke by stroke, moment by moment. If this story resonated with you, if you felt seen even just a little, then do us both a favor. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs this kind of healing. And subscribe, because here we celebrate stories that rebuild us. You are not too plain, you're the artist, and the world is waiting for what only you can create.